Yo, what's up, guys? First game back since the Olympics, guys, and ironically enough, the Leafs lose their first game back 4-2 to the smoking hot Tampa Bay Lightning, guys, Man, oh man, this game here was just a reminder how great Olympic hockey is, The Leafs tonight, get their asses handed to them by the Tampa Bay Lightning. Tampa Bay, one of the hottest teams in the NHL, if not the hottest teams in the NHL before the Olympic break, and they continue where they left off tonight. Tampa Bay just on an incredible run of form as of late, 7 straight wins. They're like 21-1 in the last 22 games. Andre Vasilevsky's like 18-0-1 in his last 19 starts, giving up less than 2 goals a game. You knew that this was going to be a very, very tough task for the Maple Leafs to come into Tampa Bay first game after the Olympics. Of course, there was going to be a little bit of rust, obviously. The Leafs were coming off a 3-game winning streak out west in Canada there. Of course, beating those Western teams. But we knew the Leafs were going to have to come out firing, win this game tonight in Tampa, win tomorrow in Florida. But as us Leaf fans have known all year this year, this hockey team is just not good enough to beat these teams. They're not a playoff team this year, as we saw again tonight. Tampa Bay just controlling the game the entire way through. They were in no threat of losing this game tonight. The first 5 minutes of the game, you see a defensive breakdown by the Leafs. Kucherov's able to get in front of the net there because Jake McCabe's not able to get inside position. 1-0 for Tampa. But luckily enough, the Leafs have one of the best video rooms in the NHL, if not the best, calling offside. After seeing the video review, it was offside by a slight inch, of course. Goal is reversed. Then we saw Tampa getting another goal on a power play. Tampa's power play, they moved the puck so beautifully. My God, they are such a great puck-moving team on the power play. They got one of the best power plays in the league. Of course, best power play the last couple months. They showed it there. Braden Point gets another goal. And then, luckily enough there, Leafs again called for offside. It is offside again. 21 straight correct offside calls for the Maple Leafs video room, man. Give those guys a bloody raise. Great job by those guys there. Those are one of the only few people doing their job properly for the Toronto Maple Leafs franchise, So Tampa's got 2 goals called back. Leafs had some great chances as well in this game. Had a couple 2-on-1s on the shorthanded there, both by Lawton and Lorentz. Not able to get a shot off, not able to complete a pass there. Really frustrating to say at least. William Nylander had a great opportunity in front. Vasilevsky made some saves. We saw Oliver Ekman-Larsson have a great chance as well. He hit the post. John Tavares had made both those passes to Willie and OEL on their opportunities there, but unfortunately neither of them were able to bury a chance. So Leafs had some opportunities, but Vasilevsky's been incredible this year, like I said. And unfortunately, those chances didn't get buried. Was able to stay 0-0, surprisingly enough, after one period. But the Leafs, man, they were giving up grade A chances, and you just knew sooner or later that Tampa Bay was going to bury one. And, ironically enough, Braden Point, this bloody guy here, who's been out since mid-January, couldn't play for Canada. The Olympics, of course, was clearly missed for Team Canada because he is such a great bloody player. Showed it tonight, returning for the Olympics for Tampa Bay, and it must be nice for Tampa Bay. You come back from the Olympic break, you get Braden Point back, and when the Leafs come back for the Olympics, we get Morgan Riley back. Just a major difference at where the two teams stand in the NHL currently, and as we saw Braden Point get his first goal of the game, official first goal of the game, Matthew Knies and Nick Waugh, they're not able to close down the middle of the ice there. Knies loses point, he's able to make a little slide, turn a little bit, able to get into that open space there between Knies and Waugh, and he's able to beat Stolarz, who's in his crease there because there's 2 men in front of him, not able to respond quick enough. Point makes it 1-0 for Tampa Bay there, and he was chomping at the bit all game, Braden Point. He was just all over the ice, and opportunity after opportunity. Him and Kucherov, were linking up all over this game today, and Kucherov as well. Him and Vasilevsky sitting on a beach for 2 bloody weeks. Those two are rejuvenated and re-energized. We saw Kucherov today with that assist for the second goal of the game to Gonçalves. What an assist by Kucherov. What a deke by Gonçalves there to make it 2-0 for Tampa Bay. Just incredible, how Tampa Bay, how lucky they are. You got your superstar back in Point. You had some of your superstars in Vasilevsky and Kucherov sitting on a beach. They are going to be primed and ready for this final stretch of the regular season and the playoffs. The Tampa Bay Lightning, they were just all over the Maple Leafs tonight. The Leafs, They had some chances. Like I said, Willie had another breakaway with a great outlet pass by Simone Benoit. But again, Vasilevsky comes up massive there. Leafs did have chances. They had a power play at the beginning of the second period. Vasilevsky made some big saves there. If the Leafs had just buried a chance or two, it might have been a different hockey game. But Tampa Bay, like I said, just dominant on all facets of this game, guys. Again, on the power play, like I said, Tampa just moves the puck so beautifully. It's honestly bloody scary how good they are with the puck, man. Tampa Bay, finding Kucherov for his goal there, at the corner of the net there. It's just the puck movement. I'm so jealous on how beautifully they move the puck on their power play, and then the Leafs, how they struggle on their power plays. Even though we did get a power play goal tonight, it didn't matter. Tampa Bay, up 3-0. Could have easily been 5-0 if it wasn't for those 2 goals that got called back. Tampa Bay was just getting so many grade A chances. Like I said, Leafs had some great opportunities, just repeating myself again. But, scoring 2 goals at the end there, Leafs do show a bit of an effort at the end of the game there. That's the most frustrating thing. You show an effort at the end of the game there when your backs are against the wall after Jake Getzel misses a wide open empty net there. That was the funniest moment of the game. We saw Tavares get a goal. Then we saw Nyes get a fluky goal to cut it back down. But then as soon as Tavares scores, Braden Point gets wide open in the front of the net there to make it 4-1. It's like, my God, this Leafs team just has too many breakdowns, too many times. Even before the Olympic break, we knew that coming into the post-Olympic break, the Leafs were going to have to shore up some things, but the personnel has not changed. You are expecting miracles for this hockey team to magically turn things around after being off for 2 weeks, And if Brad Treliving and Keith Pelly did not know what to do after the Olympics, I think this game here was a perfect indicator of what needs to be done. Tampa Bay are just miles ahead of the Leafs. There's other teams that are miles ahead of the Maple Leafs. Well, Buffalo won again tonight. They're not slowing down anytime soon, if you ask me. Like I said, Detroit, Montreal, those teams are great as well. But if Tampa Bay is the top of the Eastern Conference, guys, the Leafs are nowhere near that good. Nowhere near even good enough to be in a playoff spot, to say the least, guys. Tampa Bay just again showed tonight what a great team they are, what the Leafs wish they could be, but they're not. Just if Keith Pelly and Brad Treliving do not start making calls more, especially Brad Treliving, of course, they are doing a disservice to this organization. They are just not good enough this year. They are just a team that are just in the middle of the pack. They're not going to do anything this year, guys. These last 24 games are going to be a grind. I said it before the Olympic break. They should be taking calls on guys like Bobby McMahon, OEL, of course. McMahon, if you don't trade that guy tomorrow, I'm going to be disappointed. He did nothing tonight, was invisible. If you can get a first-round pick, you ship him off tomorrow, honestly. Like, Stolarz, I thought he was good tonight at times in this game. Could have gone even uglier. The Leafs left him hanging on multiple goals. I don't blame Stoley for tonight's game. Multiple times the Leafs left them hanging. Just really incredible to see how badly the Leafs are defensively. But it's no surprise to me. Just being off for 2.5 to 3 weeks was a beautiful time off, as Leaf fans know. Because to see this hockey team again, it's like, man, oh man, we went from watching the Olympics, some of the best, going at it, and now we're back to this shit. Like, it's really unfortunate, to say the least, guys. Get as many assets as you can get back before the deadline. I don't need the next 4 to 5 games to determine if this team can make the playoffs or not. We already know. You're playing Florida tomorrow. You play Ottawa, Philly, New York in the next couple days. Those teams there are not in the playoffs as well. But to me, this game here tonight, the Tampa Bay game, was a litmus test to show that the Leafs are nowhere near prepared to be a playoff team this year. It was just a major indicator as to why this team here needs to sell at the deadline. I hope Keith Pelly and Brad Treliving were not scratching their asses for 3 weeks, saying to themselves, oh, if we go on a run after the deadline, before the deadline, maybe we can make a push for the playoffs. Keith Pelly sending out letters to season ticket holders, buddy. Well, what is that going to do? You have not shown that this team here can win, and you haven't made the right moves for this team to perform on the ice. That's just how it is. They got to make some serious moves. Look at Tampa Bay, for God's sakes. A perfect example. They told Steven Stamkos, who won 2 cups with them, to take a hike because he wanted too much money. And they reverted that money to Jay Gensel. Now look what Jay Gensel is. Jay Gensel's a two-time Cup champion with a gold medal on top of it now. Those teams there know when to make the tough decisions. The Leafs have not been able to do that in the last 10 years, have not been able to make some tough decisions. They have to start making some tough decisions as well, And obviously, with the Olympics over, speaking of Austin, and the Olympics, great to see Matthews with Toronto tonight. I know he only had an assist, probably wasn't the most effective, but had a lot of traveling to do between coming from Milan, going to Miami, going to DC, going back to Tampa. It was a lot of travel for Austin. For him to come out and play tonight for Leafs, it was a good thing, because I heard a lot of bullshit on Twitter about Austin, about how the Leafs should trade him, and about how they're disgusted how he went to the White House. Some people honestly make me bloody sick. He is the bloody captain of the U.S. men's hockey team. Did you guys really expect Austin Matthews to not go to the White House, even though Donald Trump is president? And I know what's going on with all this stuff in politics and him. I understand it completely. People have their own political opinion. I'm not much into politics, and I understand some people feel a certain way about Austin going there because his mother's Mexican and all that bullshit. I get it, guys. But he's the captain of the team. He needed to go there to show face. We only went there for an hour, didn't go to the State of Union. And honestly, guys, I have no issue with him going there. People are like, get rid of this guy, strip him of the sea. I saw one stupid girl, unstitching his number off a Leaf jersey. Like, this is insanity to me, honestly. Matthews might never even get another opportunity to go to the White House. He plays here in Toronto. Ironically enough, if the Leafs were miraculously ever win a cup, he ain't going to the White House. So he probably felt this is my only chance that I'm going to get to go there. So he took advantage of it and went. I have nothing against it. The politics is another thing, another issue. From Austin Matthews' perspective, I understand why he went to the White House. I completely understand it, guys. I'm not mad at him for it. I will still love him as the Leafs captain, of course. I'm happy that he won gold, even though it's against Canada. I hope it changes his mentality, making him more hungrier to win as the Leafs captain, of course, wanting that feeling again with this franchise, hoping to win a cup since 67, having won since 67, of course, bringing the first cup home since then, would be great to see, of course. But the slander towards Austin Matthews is completely unwarranted and unjustified, if you ask me. I am not a defender of Trump or any of that stuff, but I think the stuff said about Matthews on Twitter the last 48 hours is absolutely ridiculous, to say the least, guys. Let's leave it at sports, and we'll leave it at that. But other than tonight, though, he probably got a real reality check real quickly, seeing that Jane Getzel and Boldy are not at his line anymore. So I feel bad for him regarding that, but this team here, guys, has a lot of issues, and they need to sell at the deadline. They're just not good enough. Tampa Bay showed the Leafs why they're a great team and we're not. Gonsalves, Point, and Kucherov combined for 9 points tonight. One line dominated tonight. That shows to me, guys, that the Leafs are just not good enough to make the playoffs. Start trading, guys. Start letting go of certain players. Have tough conversations with certain guys, i.e. Morgan Riley at the end of the offseason, trying to get that guy to move his no-wave clause, guys, because there needs to be some ample changes with this hockey team, not only at the deadline, but in the offseason. If this hockey team wants to do anything in Austin Matthews and William Nylander's career. So, to say the least, guys, you didn't get the best performance tonight after being off for 3 weeks. You had some okay performances. I thought Stolarz was okay tonight. I thought Willie was the best Leaf forward tonight. Had some great opportunities, William Nylander, to get a couple goals tonight, but unfortunately wasn't in the cards for the Leafs tonight, guys. Other than that, other lines were quiet tonight. Other than Lorenzen and Lyon and getting that chance, those 2-on-1 chances there, not scoring on those opportunities there. OEL hitting the post. It was pretty quiet for the third line tonight. We saw knives going up on the first line at times. Juan Robinson quiet tonight. Just not the best game tonight for these guys. Put Easton Cowan back in for Kelly Arncrook. Don't understand Berube with that. Maybe start playing some younger guys as well if you do trade out some assets, of course, with the deadline turning around the corner on Friday next week, of course, guys. But a lot to happen. A lot is going to happen in the next couple days for the Leafs before the deadline. But we hope to God to be seeing some guys getting traded and some assets coming back because, man, oh man, this is going to be a grind the next 24 games. The way this hockey team is going right now, they're nowhere near making the playoffs. They got to go 18-6-0 their last 25 games to make the playoffs because of 24 games. It's not happening. It is just not happening, to say the least, guys. But what I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions on this game tonight, guys. You know, we'll love to hear your thoughts and opinions on what you guys thought of the Olympics, all that other stuff. But just another disappointing result tonight for the Leafs tonight, guys. Now, the Leafs are back, baby. They're back to making our lives hell for the next couple months until the season's over in April. But man, oh man, another disappointing loss for the Leafs, and after winning 3 in a row before the Olympic break. But we all just knew that was just a little bit of a shining spot there for the Leafs, a little bit of a positive moment there before they got back to reality, guys. So we'll love your thoughts and opinions on this game tonight, guys. Like this video, subscribe if you guys want to see more content. Go Leafs, go as always, guys. See you guys on the next episode of Leafs Unfiltered. Ciao, guys.